reform, the results to date are clear to see, as is the ambition for further reform over the lifetime of this government.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pascal Mooney, and you have 6 minutes.
I want to welcome Fáilte and Tara, welcome the Minister. I also want to enthusiastically endorse the efforts of my friend and colleague, Senator Crown, in putting forward a very meaningful proposal in relation to Seanad reform and Seanad electoral reform. I have to say, though, that one of the downsides of this initiative is that it's, on the face of it, is a very complex bill. I would have perhaps preferred if it had been a little bit more simpler in its approach, or its execution. Its approach I have no difficulty with whatsoever. The attempt is to widen the franchise to include the citizens of Ireland, to increase the university representation, which I've never been able to understand that successive governments have failed to act on the 1979 referendum, which would have extended the university constituents, the university franchise to all those who are now effectively third-level students as a result of the development of our education system over the last 30 years. Be that as it may, though, the response from the Minister is predictable. The government have set sail on a determination, led by the Taoiseach, to abolish this House. It's interesting that a meeting that was held last week with the Labour senators and the Taoiseach and Labour leader, Eamon Gilmore, and although I wasn't the fly on the wall, inevitably in politics, and in this House in particular, it's like a hothouse, things emerge. They emerged out of Fianna Fáil parliamentary party meetings on a regular basis when we were in government, and I noticed the same tradition continues at the Fine Gael parliamentary party and indeed the Labour parliamentary party. But in the context of this meeting, my understanding is, and I stand corrected, was that the Taoiseach arrived in and his opening remarks was, "Your jobs are gone, boys and girls." So much for putting it before the people as to whether they have a choice in this. So the government are quite determined that they want to get rid of this House. And it's all very well for Minister Hogan to talk about reform. And when you look at what it is that he is trumpeting in terms of reform, what has it done to improve, to enact a more effective legislature? What, for example, is the relevance to a more effective form of government that there's going to be reduction in state funding? I hear nothing whatsoever in the paragraph where he refers to the government committed to a radical overhaul of the way Irish politics and government work. I've heard nothing whatsoever about any attempt to dilute what is effectively the most centralised form of government in Europe outside of Stalinism. That's what we have in this country, and it has been emphasised as a result of the last general election, where this government now enjoys an unprecedented majority, where they can and do, on a regular basis, bring forward proposals from the executive to the Dáil which rubber stamps government policy. And you can talk about having all the debates in the world that you want. I'm not a bit surprised that there are TDs that don't bother turning up for debates when government proposals are coming forward, simply because there's never any chance that it's going to be changed anyway. So what has got, where is there in these reform proposals any suggestion, for example, of improving or enhancing or strengthening the role of committees, of the committee system in the House, which is the norm in many European democracies? And in fact, in Denmark, when it comes to European policy, the government of the day cannot act. The European minister, the Danish European minister, if he's in Brussels and a decision has to be taken alongside his Irish counterpart, the Irish counterpart can go ahead and make the decision because he knows he can rubber stamp it when it comes back to the Dáil. But the Danish minister can't. He has to go back to the relevant House committee and put those proposals before the representatives of the people before he can do it. Why can't this House be used for that purpose? And I will say this to you, Minister. The sentiment right now may be because most people are anti-politics and anti-politicians, and the sentiment may now be towards abolition, that if the question were put today or tomorrow. But an argument has got to be engaged. The Referendum Commission will be legally and constitutionally obliged to put forward two sides of the argument, and that argument will go into every house in this country. No other party outside of government that I'm aware of is committed to the abolition of this House. They may have differing views on how the House should proceed, but Fianna Fáil, Sinn Féin, and I would say the vast majority of the independent technical group would not be support of abolition. Indeed, even within the Labour Party and in the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party, there are people who are opposed to abolition. And I will put this to you, and I think it was, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, that I better not give his name in case I have it wrong, but I do know that an academic who has a track record in analysing and assessing politics in this country, elections and referenda, went on the record, I think in the Irish Times last year, and stated that in the absence of a political consensus, no referendum has ever been passed in this country. It has only been when the political establishment has coalesced in the interests of the country as they saw it that referenda have been passed. So I will put that down on the record of the House as well. The Taoiseach and the government may think that they're going to have an easy ride in relation to how this House is going to proceed in the future. They may think that it's only a matter of putting out a referendum bill, which, by the way, according to Senator Crown, is going to cost the country 19 million. 19 million is going to cost. And it's time that another canard was nailed in relation to the cost of this House. The cost of this House is between 8 and 9 million. And I understand that the Minister for Public Reform and Expenditure has said that the abolition of the Senate, if it happens, will not be a cost-saving exercise because the money will be deployed into an as yet unstated reform agenda. And here was an opportunity for the Minister for Reform to talk about reform in the electoral context, and there's no reference at all to what the plan B will be in the event of the Senate being abolished. So I welcome this opportunity to at least put down a number of items on the record. I compliment Senator Crown. I think it's a bill that in normal circumstances would have a fair wind behind it. But I'm afraid that sentiment on the other side of the House, Senator, is totally opposed to your thinking in this regard. But that shouldn't in any way diminish the effort that you have made in this regard. And I'm fully supportive of the efforts that you have made.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Keenan, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much indeed. And I welcome the debate on Shannon's reform in the House. In actual fact, I think we should have a debate every week on Shannon's reform in the House because I think the public out there very often don't know, number one, what the Shannon does, but maybe if we had more debate and if more debate was covered, when I say covered, the actual workings of the Shannon and the legislation that goes through the Shannon, rather than the order of business, which is really what it says in the papers, and I wanted to abolish that. So I wanted to abolish the order of business, but not the work of the Shannon. I think we should have a reformed Shannon, but we are going to have a referendum, and it's up to the people whether we have a Shannon or not. It is up to us to inform the people to make an informed decision. Absolutely an informed decision. And I commend Senator Crown for the work he has put into the bill. And we've had, the Minister said there was 8 reports. I actually had written down that there was 12 reports on the Shannon, all worthy documents in their own right. Most recently as well, we've had another report from Senators Zappone and Quinn. They published a comprehensive document last summer which proposes a range of measures to transform the Shannon without the need for a constitutional change. But we are having a referendum, and there's no mistake about that. Preferably, I would like to see a preferendum where there would be yes, no, or change, but that the most recent and extensive Oireachtas published a report on the subject by the Committee on Procedure and Privileges in 2003 remains a very practical framework from which significant reform could be implemented. As is noted in this consultation paper, all 11 reports that advocated reform, all of them concluded the same thing. The fundamental problem with the Shannon in its present kind is the electoral system, and we've all recognised that. We want it broadened out, and Senator Crown's bill does this, but I will go through later on the system that is outlined in the bill when I think it is not the way to do it. It is over-politicised at the moment, and it should be changed, and I think we're all in agreement with that. How we change it is the thing. And I want to say, in relation to the bill on the panels of constituencies that are outlined, I think the system outlined in this bill is a bit cumbersome, and anyone putting them forward on any one of the panels, 1,000 signatures, say, right, it'd be easy enough to, somebody said, stand outside Mass and get 1,000 signatures or whatever, but the actual terminology used and the language used in the bill on the description of the panels is so wide and broad. As well as that, the verification of signatures, you could end up with a Shannon at the end of the day, when you would go to verify the signatures, if they weren't verified before the vote, you could end up with disqualification of senators. You could end up with half the Senate disqualified. So verification as it stands at the moment, the returning officer goes in, is asked 1 in 4 verify A, B, C. There's nothing in this bill to provide for that. The 40,000 signatures, let's say 5 panels, 200,000 signatures, like 14 days from the last signature until the date closes. It's a huge onus. I also think the panels are too broad. Practically, you know, the language, as I said, that is used, literature. Anybody involved in what is reading a book, teaching, whatever is literature. Nearly all the adult population have done some kind of work and lives could claim to have been laboured. You know, I would say the panels as described are so broad that why bother having them at all? Why not just throw it open to the whole, like the EU elections, and say I'm going to have X amount of constituencies rather than the panels? Now, I would say panel system is good, but it's not defined enough in this legislation. In relation to the certificates of attestation and achievement, I think as well there could be problems with that in verification of certificates. How on earth, or who is going to verify and certificates of achievement? We know how easy it is to duplicate, photocopy, all of this. All of that has to be certified, authenticated, verified, and none of it is provided for in the bill on how you would go about doing that. The onus on the returning officer is absolutely out by the side of it. You know, you couldn't have it. Couldn't be unworkable. In relation to Section 28 states that polls for the Shannon must be on the same day as the Dáil. Right, you say save money. I would prefer myself to do the same day the EU elections. Doesn't say anything about posters because you have constituencies. Are you going to end up with a Dáil election and a Shannon election on the same day and the polls plastered with posters? Doesn't say anything about regulation of posters or whatever. It should be there. If it's in it, it's not. Senator Crown has a provision that if electors can provide the presiding officer with a certificate of achievement from the relevant university or technology, may choose to stand in a Shannon constituency. Fine. I say, as I say, authentication of that again is a question.
It's fine at the moment.
I could agree.
And it is done.
I could agree that you say, right, let the senators and everything else pay for the election because any bill brought to the Shannon has to be financial neutral. Let the senators pay for it, say, right, okay, let's do that. But I think it would be unconstitutional if you don't have the same scenario for the Oireachtas Dáil elections. Let them pay for that as well because you can't apply one to Oireachtas Dáil election and another to a Shannon. You couldn't possibly do that. It would be challenged in the courts. In relation to Section 47, the Act of 97 is amended to include Section 32. I would agree election expenses, and that I would agree with the Minister, lay down a thing. But I don't think there should be any return to a candidate that doesn't reach a certain quota of votes, same as a Dáil election. There's absolutely no provision for if you can return expenses, there has to be a quota of votes as well as that. I think that should be mentioned in the bill. There are listed recognised professions in Appendix 1, and I know this is a small issue, but I would have liked to see house husband or housewife listed in the list of Appendix as well as the occupations that you have listed in Appendix 1. It would show that house husbands and housewives is a job too. Regarding Schedule 2, I want to ask Senator Crown, does an institution of education, I know you have said that, as well as the listed institution, any institution for Heat Tech Level 7, I want to say, I think it's important, just 1 minute, the role of
we don't have a minute, Senator.
is not performing as it is, and it has to be changed. The system isn't working. But I think the question we should be asking as well, and the question we should be informing people as well, why abolish the Shannon? But ask the question, why keep it? And that is important. An independent Shannon, or we say a system that would work in conjunction with a reformed Dáil, would make, I know you're giving me the eyes here, but quotas for women. Minister brought in the quotas for women to the Dáil elections. You've mentioned nothing for Shannon. It might be unworkable, but I think it's an issue we should look at as well. Because why leave it out?
Senator, I really do have to ask you to conclude, please.
All I say, I commend the minute. I just finished. I commend Senator Crown for drafting the bill. I said it has too many technical problems. For that reason, I can't support it. But I do support the rationale behind it.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sarpone, you have 6 minutes.
Okay, here, look. I have 6 minutes.
6 minutes, yeah.
Okay, I thought we had 8 minutes.
No, 6 minutes, Senator.
Welcome to the House, Minister. I believe that we need a reimagined Shannon. We need a Shannon that is not hopelessly compromised by political patronage and a massive democratic deficit. Does simply abolishing the Seanad necessarily increase democracy? In my view, it does not. In fact, if political failure lies at the heart of Ireland's economic collapse, and if we are in a climate of changing Ireland and a socio-political moment when reform seems possible, a reimagined Seanad to enhance democracy and expert lawmaking opens exciting possibilities. Reform of the Seanad must be coupled with a radical reform of the Dáil and its procedures, which, though promised, we have yet to see realized. I passionately believe that we need a reimagined Seanad that incorporates the principles of democracy, inclusive representativeness, and expertise. I, too, along with Senator Quinn and others, have worked on this issue for a long time with extraordinary detail, robust political science research, and expert legal advice. Our proposals can be grouped according to 4 prime building blocks. First of all, we can reform the Seanad radically through legislation. We do not require a referendum to do so. Our carefully crafted bill is almost completed. Secondly, we can increase substantially Ireland's democratic governance by providing a one-person, one-vote system for 43 of the 60 Seanad seats. Thirdly, a reform of the candidate selection and electoral system for Seanad seats can increase non-mainstream and marginalised voices to be represented in Irish democracy and can increase professional and sectoral expertise to be brought to the scrutiny of Irish lawmaking. Fourthly, the Seanad's remit and its way of conducting business can be changed so that it becomes more effective and fills gaps currently in the legislative process. Now, I have some questions to ask my Seanad colleagues. What is the proper way to govern? Are those who believe that we should lob off one of the arms of governance with the prime rationale of saving money, are they right? What is the proper way to govern? Is not the proper way the right way to put a vision to the people, to outline the rationale for and the path toward that vision, to analyze the risks, to name the goals and the outcomes? Is not the correct way to put this extensive, detailed work before the people and to invite them to engage with it, to consult with you, to deliberate with you about it, and then and only then to move forward with proposals for reform? Isn't this what the government has done with the recent referendum on children's rights? Isn't this what the government is doing with regard to a number of prime policy areas? So when it comes to one of the most critical issues of all, namely the overall governance of this state, my question is this: why this undue haste? And colleagues, especially Fine Gael and Labour senators, would you please ask the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach, why this undue haste? No consultation with the people has happened, including the current members of the Seanad, and the government has flatly refused, with absolutely no rationale, to put this issue into the Constitutional Convention. No white paper has been written, and furthermore, as we are all aware, not one of the 8 or 11 or 12 reports published on the role of the Seanad have called for its abolition. They all called for its reform. Furthermore, the government wants to put a referendum to abolish the Seanad without plans for genuine radical reform of the Dáil. What we have in the Dáil is the fusion of the executive and the legislature, together with the practices of whipping and the guillotine. The government says that we will have a radical reform committee system to ensure that proper checks and balances will happen without a Seanad. But can the people really expect that enhanced committees can do this job? Committees are constituted by elected representatives from local constituencies. Are the people to expect that in this context these deputies will be capable of shedding their political views, party affiliations and electoral concerns for the purposes of the right law for all the people? Senator Crown's bill puts the issue of the Seanad reform to this House. Of course, I think that this is a good thing. It does incorporate the democratic principle of one person, one vote for the seats that can be chosen within the limitations of the Constitution. This, too, I think, is a good thing. There is no adequate rationale for the current party political control of Seanad candidacy and electoral process for the 43 panel seats. The bill also simplifies the current process of becoming a candidate for a panel on foot of a petition signed by 1,000 people who attest to the person's suitability to run for a particular panel. Senator Crown's stated rationale for this simplification is to open candidacy to anyone. While it is critical to open the candidacy, it should not be done at the expense of expertise nor the potential for greater inclusiveness in representation. The bar for the determination of the candidate's requisite knowledge of relevance to the particular panel is set very low, too low in this bill. It reduces considerably the potential for the Seanad to be peopled by experts within the sectors or constituencies of the panels. This would reduce, I think, the potential for a distinctive legislative scrutiny provided by Seanad members. Furthermore, there's no stated rationale contained within the bill, or indeed any research underpinning the bill, to abolish entirely the role of nominating bodies. I believe that we should change how candidates are nominated to stand for panels by initiating a dramatic expansion to the nominating bodies. If a bill were to modernize the criteria whereby an organization could become a nominating body, this would open up Shannon Arran to civil society. A couple of weeks ago, I hosted, along with some of my independent colleagues, a public meeting for civil society and arts organizations who might be interested in becoming nominating bodies. Over 60 organizations showed up and demonstrated significant enthusiasm for the possibility that this provided them to influence the political process. The potential involvement of these organizations could allow non-mainstream minority and marginalized voices to become part of Shannon Arran. I must raise a question, too, about the risk in Senator Crown's scheme that non-resident Irish passport holders could swamp the voters' lists in all constituencies. While it might be an appropriate policy objective to entitle non-resident Irish persons a vote, is the net that Senator Crown casts too wide? And two more issues then before I conclude. Has Senator Crown missed an opportunity already signalled by Senator Keane to include gender quotas in legislation that reforms the Shannon? We're exploring how this could be done, thereby incorporating a mechanism that promotes inclusive representation. And secondly, Senator Crown's effort to legislate for the 1979 constitutional amendment to extend the electorate for the university seats does not appear to be fair, nor to reduce the charge of elitism. Why not reform what is to one 6-seat constituency in which all graduates of third-level colleges who choose not to vote in the 5 panels could vote? So to conclude, it is my considered opinion that the Shannon, the upper house, should be reformed for the governance of this state. We don't need a referendum to do that, nor do we need all the costs that such a referendum would entail. Finally, this matter needs time for careful, in-depth discussion and consideration. As surely we have learnt in recent years, the choices of state governance that imply major change need time. It is the least that the people deserve.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Batchelor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to welcome Minister Hogan to the House and to begin by commending, as others have done, Senator Crown for the immense amount of work that he has put into drafting this bill, a very detailed bill. And I know myself how it can be very difficult drafting a private member's bill, particularly in a technical matter, and I think he's really done a tremendous job. And I think it's very useful and very welcome that we would debate Shannon reform in this House. I've made no secret that my personal view is it would be preferable to reform the Shannon rather than to abolish it, and I've spoken on that many times in this House and elsewhere. However, this bill is introduced at a time when the government has clearly committed to putting a referendum to the people on the continued existence for the Shannon. That commitment is in the programme for government, and those of us on the government side know that and knew that when we signed up to that programme, and we're committed to supporting that referendum bill. And indeed, it's worth remembering that in the general election of 2011, most, if not all, political parties identified abolition of the Shannon as constituting part of their political reform agenda. And just to read from the Fianna Fáil election manifesto of 2011, they say it is important to note that second chambers are not an essential part of parliamentary democracy. If our proposals for reform of electoral system and of government are enacted, we will support the abolition of the Shannon. The savings will be used to resource different elements to improve the workings of democracy and oversight of government. The Sinn Féin manifesto similarly proposed the abolition of the Shannon in its current form. So I think
as well. The first thing he did when he seized power
I think it's important. I think it's important we would have a measured debate with Senator Norris. I don't think there's any great advantage, from quoting from Robert Mugabe now. So I think
Senator Batchelor, without interruption, please.
But I think it is interesting to note that this was in the manifestos of the political parties, that this commitment has been made, and I think it's welcome. But I must say, I think that the forthcoming referendum has focused the minds of people, both in this House and elsewhere, on reform like never before. And I'm just listening to Senator Sapone and having read the excellent consultation paper her group produced in September on radical Shannon reform through legislative change, and knowing that there's other legislation.
Senator Norris, while I appreciate it may be difficult to listen to what you're hearing, please, without interruption, Senator Batchelor. Thank you.
Senator Wilson, I'll ignore the implied comment there on my speech.
No implied comment from the Chair.
No, of course, you're entirely impartial.
Very much tongue-in-cheek, I would say. He's a great representative.
I was merely interpreting how he may feel, Senator.
Thank you for the clarification, Chair. I'm conscious, though, that the debate on abolition has concentrated minds on reform, and we have had more, I think, more lively, more thoughtful and reflections on reform than ever before. I'm just looking again at, in today's Irish Times, the article by Owen O'Malley from DCU proposing a very radical reform of the Seanad, which I think has a great deal of merit to it. It reminds me of a debate when Michael McDowell and I spoke in a few months ago, and we were both on the same side in favour of reform, and Michael McDowell summed it up by saying, cut it down and pay them less, but keep the Seanad, but in a very different format. So I think this is the sort of debate that we're going to have more of, and I very much welcome that coming up to the referendum. Senator Zappone has identified various flaws in Senator Crown's bill, and I don't want to dwell on those. I would say one thing, though, in section 4, where it provides that no person shall be a candidate in a Dáil election and also a Seanad election. I just wonder about the constitutionality of restricting candidacy in that way. I would be concerned about that particular element of the bill. So I think there's clearly issues that can be raised in it. But I think, in general, as I say, it's very welcome we have the opportunity to debate this question of reform through legislation, because clearly it's a question that will come right back into focus if the referendum is not passed. And clearly, on the government side, there has to be a reflection on that too. On the 90th anniversary of the Seanad in December last, I referred members of the House to a wonderful paper done on extensive research, really presenting extensive research on the Seanad. And it's a paper produced by Senior Counsel and Fianna Fáil Councillor Jim O'Callaghan, who wrote about the history of the Seanad. And I suppose the key point message he gives is that throughout the 90 years of the Seanad, there has been endless calls for abolition, endless debates on retention, and indeed, as we are aware, Fianna Fáil did in fact abolish the Seanad in 1936, following the Seanad's voting down a government bill to restrict the wearing of uniforms. But following the abolition of the Seanad, there was extensive debate then about the merits of a bicameral over a unicameral system. And as a result of the debate, public opinion appeared to change to the extent that, of course, there was a Seanad, a second house, provided for in the 1937 Constitution, as we know, with the somewhat different format that we currently have. But since that reconstitution of the Seanad, there have again been quite numerous calls for abolition. As against those, I would say, the Seanad has a very strong history in a number of respects, and in particular in terms of the committee-stage debates on bills, where we've seen some really strong and really thoughtful debates going on across the House. The great merit being that senators on both sides can contribute. They don't have to be specialists, they don't have to be spokespersons on a particular area, but they can contribute their own expertise on particular provisions of a bill. And we've seen, all of us can think of very good examples of that, of the sort of debates we've had on that. I would also say the Seanad has a strong history of introducing private members' bills, and this private members' debate is held in that context, where we've seen Senator Quinn's bill on construction contracts and two bills I introduced myself, one on FGM and one on humanist weddings, which were subsequently supported by different governments, it must be said, and became government legislation. So I think the Seanad has a very strong history of introducing and debating on issues that are not considered sufficiently or considered to any great extent in the Dáil. I think that if the referendum is defeated, the call for reform becomes unarguable, and I would hope we will see radical reform both in the method of election and on the working structures of the Seanad. Reform that can be introduced, as we know, through legislation and without further constitutional change. And just finally, Dr. Elaine Byrne suggested some years ago a very sort of physical sign of the Seanad, to put that the Seanad casket and signatures should be put on permanent public display, perhaps in Leinster House. I think they're still in the Royal Irish Academy, and it's something I've raised before in this House, Minister, and you might just take it on board as, if nothing else, a memory of the Seanad. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Batch. Senator Quinn, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Laska Hillock. Minister, you're welcome in here, but I must admit, this particular bill is one that I certainly support. I believe we should be supporting this, and I urge everybody in the House here to give it serious consideration. I've been in the House 20 years, and I've watched and listened and viewed the very good work that has gone on in this Seanad. The number of times that they've corrected and amended legislation going through, it would be a shame to abolish it. And I can't agree with the words of those that there have been many calls for abolition. I haven't heard calls for abolition. It's come out of the blue. And I believe that is not right. If anything, I think this is a power grab by the Dáil for more authority. And we do need a second opinion. And a second opinion is essential in any piece of legislation. If we do that, and the present system of with parties, and particularly with a programme for government that is done behind the scenes, you find ourselves in a situation where the parties that we've elected to the Dáil agree a programme for government behind the scenes to the extent that the individual members don't have the opportunity to do anything there. So I'd like to support Senator Crown on introducing this bill. There are a number of aspects to it that would bring much benefit to our political system. And may I just say to Senator Keane and others that if there are changes that we should take place, let's make sure that we bring those changes in at committee stage, because there may be things that would improve it, but if that is so. But I believe it would have benefit to our political system, and it would increase democracy if we accept this bill on the basis. What's so good about this legislation is that it'll offer citizens a choice. That is not a simple yes or no to the Seanad at a referendum, but a third choice, one of reform. Now, Senator Crown has written himself this week, and I thought it was very interesting what he said, quote, "Senators who vote for the bill are not necessarily opposing Seanad abolition, rather they are enhancing the choice facing the citizenry in the referendum," unquote. Now, we must remember that fact. As a public representative, as a senator, you are facilitating the ability to make different choices. Surely that's the very minimum that a public representative can do. Many of the proposals in the bill are the sort of things that people have been calling for, and indeed similar ones have been made in the recently published document that we talked about tonight, that is, Open It, Don't Close It. First of all, as Senator Crown says, the process of candidate selection would be democratised, and any citizen would be allowed to contest Seanad elections by a process of popular nomination. Candidates will need the signatures of 1,000 citizens on their nomination papers. Now, there'll be some criticism of that. If that's not the correct way to go, they can be easily changed at committee stage. Thus, they will not need the backing of a party. It will extend the voting rights for the university panels to graduates of the other universities, Dublin City University, University of Limerick, and to the graduates of institutes of technology. Now, I believe these are extremely straightforward, sensible moves in the context of the limits of the Constitution. It would extend the voting rights so that a wider variety of voices is likely to be heard. Now, that's exactly what we need. The real-world opinions and expertise of different voices, especially those from business and voluntary sectors. I have a fear that there are far too many voices that come from limited sectors of society. We need politicians who can see the country from a national point of view. We talk about innovation and the smart economy, yet those elected officials who, with concrete ideas to improve our society, are either stifled by the need to look after local constituents or by the current party political system. Senator Crown has often referred to the fact that many senators talk about their constituency, and the constituency is in effect one of the panels, but they often talk about that constituency referring to a geographical constituency. The point is that we need representation of communities that are not regionally based. A reformed Seanad could provide this even further in future. The reforms contained in this bill would enable the Seanad to fulfil the role envisaged by the designers of the Constitution. I think the Constitution, when we designed it, and the original Seanad, the concept of it, and Minister Sullivan, you're very welcome. That's the second day in a row you're getting fond of us here, indeed. I wish your party was also as fond of us as you are. The reforms contained in this bill would enable the Seanad to fulfil the role envisaged by the designers of the Constitution. I think the concept of having panels was very well done. I think the mistake that was made in 1936 was that the voting was given solely to politicians and party politicians, as it was. I think that has weakened the ability of the system. But I think if Senator Crown's bill goes through, it would allow the voice of all citizens to be heard through new voting rights. We must hear the voices of groups, including minorities, the diaspora, and indeed the Seanad could be a much gender-balanced form than the Dáil. A reformed Seanad would truly represent our society and be made up of a diverse range of professionals and expertise. It would have the ability to even more deeply scrutinise and improve legislation. Indeed, it would be able to reject bad legislation or legislation that improperly encroaches on citizens' rights. Now, I believe the public will own this House if they have a vote and a system whereby they acquire that vote would work very well. What we set out to achieve in 1937 was not to challenge the Dáil, but it was to have a second Dáil, or to have a second Dáil, or look for further powers. We don't need further powers. The concept was a belief that the bicameral system was much more useful than having one house, because it gave a second opinion, a second view of all legislation as it came through. Now, that is still the case. The Seanad gives oversight to every piece of legislation. And during the years that I've been a member here, literally thousands upon thousands of amendments have been made to numerous Seanad bills, numerous bills in the Seanad, and a very large number of bills have been initiated in this House. To abolish it removes the ability to do that. The legislation that has been improved no end, as many items of legislation have been improved no end as a result. It would be a great shame if that oversight were to be done away with. And surely we should be learning from the mistakes of the Celtic Tiger, and we refer to that here tonight, and realise that what we need is more oversight of our systems, not less. That would be a huge mistake to lose that. The Seanad has now turned into an easy scapegoat for political parties ahead of the general election. But I believe we need a much more mature attitude. It has often been marginalised as successive governments have naturally wanted to curtail its ability to put a check on the government. But merely pandering to populism and abolishing the Seanad will simply weaken the ability of the Oireachtas to hold the government to account. We need a reform alternative. One must also not forget that the Seanad has the power to initiate legislation. I must mention, as Senator Batchik did, my own Constitution Contracts Bill, which we hope will become law next month. It aims to improve the conditions for business and subcontractors in general. But I think of other bills that Senator Batchik and others have introduced here, and they've become law or are becoming law. And whether they came law as the initial bill or whether they were changed, we mustn't forget that members of the Oireachtas are here as legislators and not just to grandstand or gain columns in newspapers. I particularly welcome that the bill provides that the Seanad be dissolved at the same time as the Dáil. I think that makes a huge amount of sense. The Seanad is far from perfect. It should be reformed, it should be modernised. However, the current talk of shutting it down is merely a political smokescreen and a distraction from the very real financial and economic difficulties faced by the ordinary citizens of this country. Indeed, the debate about political reform should not focus entirely on the Seanad, but rather on how the Oireachtas as a whole can be improved and whether government can be made more accountable and transparent. In general, citizens at the moment don't have a right to vote for the Seanad, and therefore they don't feel any ownership of this House. I believe the public will own the Seanad if they have that voice, if they have that vote and that voice. I'm not seeking a stronger Seanad, I don't think we need it, but I am looking for a Seanad that will actually perform better. To be able to do this, the public will have to own it. And Senator Crown has shown us one system of how we can own it as citizens. Our goal as legislators is to improve the lives of our citizens. Removing a layer of protection from citizens by abolishing the Seanad is not the way forward. What we desperately need in this country is more oversight, not less. We need to move away from the spin that currently permeates through all levels of our political system. What anybody can see very clearly is that a lack of oversight over government decisions is a recipe for disaster. Governments cannot be free to introduce any legislation that they like and expect it to be passed. The debate, the value of having that debate here in this House is well worthwhile. What we really need is a reform Seanad that can increase the effectiveness of the Oireachtas as a whole. I believe that cross-party support of this bill would be a great step in the reform process. Merely by passing the bill, senators are clearly showing that they want to enable the public to choose from more choices on the future of the Seanad. That is particularly pro-democratic. I'm glad that a fellow senator, in Senator Crown, is demonstrating that the Seanad is taking the future into its own hands. I believe it's worthy of support. I urge you to support this bill. If there are changes to take place, they can take place at the committee stage. I believe it is worthy of support, and I congratulate Senator Crown on introducing this bill. Make sure that we do show support that he deserves in this case.
Thank you, Senator Quinn. Senator Bradford, you have 6 minutes, Senator.
Thank you very much, Cahill Cowan. Welcome, Minister of State O'Sullivan, to the House. I'm sorry that Minister Hogan has left the House, but presumably we will have a chance to discuss the matter with him again at an early date. Thanks, Senator Crown, for the work which he has undertaken in producing this bill, and it certainly adds to the political debate in relation to the future. I also look forward with keen interest to the publication of a further piece of legislation on Shannon reform being worked upon presently by Senator Quinn, Senator Sapone and others. Look, I was in the City West Hotel Dublin in September of 2009 when, to a hushed audience, the now Taoiseach and then Fine Gael leader in opposition, Enda Kenny, announced his proposal to abolish Shannon Éireann. I had also been at the Glenty Summer School perhaps 2 or 3 months earlier when Deputy Kenny announced his view as to what the Shannon could be, how it could be expanded and how its role could actually be enhanced. And indeed I was at the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party, and this is why I'm sorry that Minister Hogan is not present. I was at the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party in, I think, June of 2009, when, as part of our document on what we called New Politics, we provided a very strong, very interesting, very dynamic blueprint for a new, improved, enhanced and democratised Shannon Éireann. And I want to reflect on what was the then Fine Gael policy of 2009, because I think it provided a route map and a roadmap as to what this Shannon could be and what future Shannons could be. We favoured the election of approximately half of the members of Shannon Éireann directly by the public, an election to take place on the same day as the European Parliament elections. We favoured an extension of voting rights to all university graduates from all third-level colleges, and we favoured, as far as I now recall, an enhancement of the panel system. I thought it was a very well worked out document, and that's why I was so surprised when 3 or 4 months later we did not just do a U-turn, but I suppose an absolute about turn, and decided that our policy was now in favour of abolishing Shannon Éireann. I won't comment. But I do look forward to participating in the very crucial debate over the next number of months. I genuinely cannot know of any country or any society which has found that less democracy rather than more was better. I do not know of any house or houses of parliament which found that by reducing the number of people participating, reducing the number of people asking questions, reducing the number of people participating resulted in better politics. And as we said yesterday, Minister, on another piece of legislation, it's better politics which the public seek. The shallow, debate about the cost of politics and the cost of politicians, that is quickly forgotten when people reflect on what politics is about. It's about representation of the people, decision-making, investigating, bringing forward ideas and suggestions. And this House, I think, has played a huge and historically proud tradition in that particular regard and can do so again. So I want to focus on what real political reform should be about. And if it was so simple and so simplistic as scrapping Shannon Éireann, it could and would have been done a long time ago. So we do need better politics, and we do need to start in the place currently occupied by 166 elected members, Dáil Éireann. We spoke about the political promises which were made in the recent general election and how we have to fulfil those commitments. To the very best of my knowledge, we promised, certainly many parties promised, that the Dáil would be reduced by 20 or 30 people, not 8. We have quickly forgotten that. We promised in the programme for government, and we get very excited about saying that the programme for government is some sort of new latter-day Bible, that Dáil Éireann would sit 4 days per week. I think on one Friday per month, it's what I call fraudulent Friday, Dáil sits on a day when no votes can be taken, no questions can be asked, and a simple quorum is required, and people go merrily home at 12 o'clock. God help us if that's Dáil reform. God help us if that's political reform. So I look forward over the course of the next few months with this bill, with the bill of Senator Sapone and others being on the agenda, to having a real debate about political reform. Because it is truly important that we examine how this country is being run. It's particularly important that we examine the role of elected persons, be they in this House or in the other House. We are arriving now, at a dangerous situation where elected members of the Dáil who are not members of the government are entirely irrelevant. They have no say. And Minister of State, I think it has now even become more serious, because with the Economic Management Committee structure within the Cabinet, if you're a cabinet minister but not a member of that particular committee, your role, I think, is also very, very reduced. And I think that's something which needs to be actually looked at from a constitutional perspective. The role of cabinet ministers who do not sit in that all-powerful body known as the Cabinet Economic Management Subcommittee. So deep and lengthy questions are needed on politics and on reform. Here this afternoon, Senator Ground has made his pitch and his ground and his presentation. I would have to say I haven't examined the bill in the detail perhaps that I should have done, so that I only received a copy of it yesterday. I would certainly have, I suppose I would call it political or ideological difficulties with the whole question of the voting for voting rights for immigrants. Maybe I'm too much of an old-fashioned traditionalist, but the old phrase of, you know, no representation without taxation is one which I still find difficult to grapple with. But you know, all of this can be debated and teased out, and I look forward to that debate. Finally, Cathaoirleach, you know, mention was made of the Constitutional Convention. Again, that, you know, that side by side with the programme for government, I suppose, is the other part of this new Bible of political correctness. I find it absolutely politically insulting that the Constitutional Convention can be tasked with asking what I would have to say is the silly question of should 16-year-olds be allowed to vote, but it's not allowed to reflect on whether or not there should be a second chamber of Parliament in this democracy. What a pathetic political joke that is. So I conclude my remarks in again thanking Senator Crown for his work. And I'm not attempting to be patronising. I have to say I don't expect, for a number of reasons, that should you push this matter to a vote this afternoon, you will succeed. I would therefore ask you not to let the government off the hook by having that vote. I would ask you to adjourn the matter this afternoon so that it may remain on the agenda, it may remain alongside the other bill on the agenda, and allow us to come back in a short few weeks and then decide whether we are political mice or political men, and I'd better say political mice or political women as well. And if we in this House do not believe in the existence of a second chamber, why should the Irish people? And I think this is a truly important test of what we, believe as politicians and what value we place, not in ourselves, but in the work of all those generations who have worked in this place, from the Yeatses to the Hydes, to the Robinsons, to the Fitzgeralds, to the Dukes, to the Wilsons. Do we value those people's traditions and work? I certainly do. And I believe new generations of those people can emerge in the unique political place which is Shannon Éireann. Now, I regret to say I feel this scrap the Shannon thing, is nothing but simplistic politics. And I hope we are mature enough this evening not to divide in the normal silly political fashion that is more in line with the politics of the other House. So I would ask you, Senator Crown, to park adjudication on your proposal this afternoon. Shortly coming before us will be the other bill. Let us look at the two bills, let us debate them, and let us then decide how we can best use this House and use our votes to protect Irish democracy. Because it's more political questioning we need, it's more people involved in the political process, it's more debates, not less. So again, thank you for bringing us to this position, but I would certainly hope that you will not cause us to divide politically on this matter here this evening.
Thank you, Senator Bradford. Senator Daly, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. We need reform of both the Dáil and the Senate. This country suffers from a national democratic deficit unparalleled in the Western world. Consider this: only 2% of the laws made in Ireland every year are debated and scrutinised by the Dáil and the Senate. Only 2%. 98% of the laws are done by way of EU regulations, EU directives and statutory instruments brought into effect by ministers and ministers of state and by the EU without any consideration by this House. you were thinking of a country where only 2% of the laws were scrutinised by the Parliament, you'd say the UN should be brought in. Any country with that level of democratic deficit would be worthy of EU intervention. Emmett Stagg said that the scrutiny of statutory instruments simply does not happen. And in relation to EU directives, last year in August, for the first time, Ireland brought in organ transplantation legislation. How was it done? Does anyone remember it coming into the Health Committee? Does anyone remember it coming into the Dáil? Does anyone remember it coming in here? You don't remember it because it didn't happen. What happened was the Minister for Health came back from his holidays in August and signed an EU directive into law, bringing into effect 64 pages of legislation which was to do with organ transplantation. All the organ donation organisations and those involved in that sector had serious concerns about the way that was done, and yet it was not debated here. Is that a country that suffers from a democratic deficit? Most certainly it is. The power rests, as we all know, in the hands of a few. And it's time that democracy was restored to the people who were elected by the citizens of the country. 184 years ago, Daniel O'Connell, the great emancipator, ensured that Catholics got the vote. 95 years ago, the franchise was extended to women, and 45 years ago, nationalists marched in Derry for one person, one vote. Consider this. There are 1.8 million people living in the north. There are 800,000 Irish passport holders living throughout the world, living overseas. That's 36% of those entitled to be Irish citizens under Articles 2 and 3 of our Constitution. And yet we don't give them a vote. 33 countries in the Council of Europe. Of those, only 4 don't give votes to their citizens overseas. We are in great company. Ireland, Cyprus, Malta, Greece. There are 196 countries in the world, 115 give votes to their citizens overseas, and yet we don't do that. We have a diaspora of 70 million. We have passport holders living overseas that if you added up the populations of the city of Dublin, Cork, Waterford, Galway and Limerick combined, we don't give them the vote either. And why is it that of the 46,500 citizens who emigrated last year, who are concerned about what's happening at home, that will bring them home, we don't give them the vote? In Portugal, 20% of the voters live outside the state, and yet they're all entitled to vote in their elections. Only 4 seats are ring-fenced for them, but yet they have the entitlement to vote. I don't consider it practical. I don't think the political establishment will allow 1 seat in the Dáil chamber to be voted on by 1 person who is an Irish citizen living overseas or living in the north. In France, 12 Senate seats are given to those representing those citizens overseas. And yet here, we will not do that. I commend Senator Crown and his legal team, Shane and the others, for bringing this bill forward. But it does show the contempt of the government, just to show why we need reform of the political system, the Dáil and the Senate, that when the minister came in here, he didn't even address the bill. He said, we're getting ready, I'm not even going to look at this bill. But then again, as the members of the government opposite would know, and the TDs in the government in the other house would know, that the contempt shown by Cabinet and ministers towards the Dáil, towards the democratic system, is there for all to see, because it is a rubber stamp. The Cabinet hold the power. They bring forward the legislation. The TD's job is to get elected so he can rubber stamp legislation. We need reform of the entire democratic system. We have a national democratic deficit that is absolutely unparalleled. 2% of the laws made every year are debated in these chambers. 2%. How is it that by abolishing any house, the democratic deficit is going to get better. It is only going to get bigger. And the power will remain concentrated in the hands of the establishment. By that I mean the political elite, that being those ministers who were appointed, and their officials. That's all that's going to happen. And is there any chance then that we can repair the democratic deficit when it comes to our citizens overseas? Will we ever extend the vote in a meaningful way to those citizens? We talk about it in our constitution, and yet we don't really do anything about it. We are in very, how could I only describe it, dubious company when you think that the countries that don't give votes to their citizens overseas are dictatorships, are those that don't have free and fair elections. We're in that club when it comes to our citizens overseas.
Senator Daly, without interruption.
There is only one chamber that can offer a chance, a real chance, that we can extend the franchise to those people we have disenfranchised up until now, and that is here. But that aside, the entire system needs reform. The Dáil needs reform. The Senate needs reform, but the political process needs reform. We have an economic deficit. We have a national democratic deficit as well, and the system needs entire reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Daly. Senator Mary Ann O'Brien. Senator, you have 6 minutes, Senator.
Thank you, Lásca Hirlach. Good evening, Minister. Good evening, Senators. I feel this evening presents the Seanad and has presented the Seanad with a great opportunity to discuss its future in a meaningful and real fashion. Too often in recent months, there have been discussions in this House about the Chamber's future, which has portrayed the Seanad and its members in a very negative light. At times it has resembled animals trying to avoid the slaughter. However, tonight's debate, brought around by Senator Crown's Seanad Reform Bill, provides us as legislators with a tangible bill for discussion. Firstly, I feel it's important to place on the record of the House my congratulations and appreciation for Senator Crown's rather solo run to bring us this bill before the Chamber this evening. During his campaign and his contributions since arriving here, he has always stated his belief that the Seanad needed reform, and he was intending to attempt to instigate that reform. And indeed, he has followed up on his words by actions, and I thank him for that. One point I would like to make to Senator Crown: Rome was not built by a lone centurion, and I and many of my fellow senators would have welcomed an approach by him to consult with him. And I wonder, perhaps Senator Zappone and Senator Quinn had consulted deeply with Senator Crown on this evening, because I know you senators had been working very hard and long on your own reform document. I would also welcome Senator Daly's words a few moments ago, and indeed Senator Bradford's speeches earlier on. Speaking on the content of the bill itself, for the most part, I would support it in entirety, as it goes a long way to addressing many of the problems we have in the current Seanad. I'm not a politician at heart, nor am I obviously a political scientist. I would like to think my comments here this evening, and in general in this House, reflect the public's feelings on a given issue. It is my contention that the Seanad struggles to be a meaningful upper house due to the stranglehold the political parties have on its due to the electoral system. The current process ensures that the government of the day will have a cosy and safe majority, and the remainder of the other seats will be awarded to other political parties. To borrow the President, Michael D. Higgins' words, independence of mind tends to be a rarity in this chamber, usually the reserve of the university senators, and it has been extended during this Seanad to the Taoiseach's nominees. Under Senator Crown's bill, every citizen entitled to vote in local elections will be entitled to a Seanad vote. This undoubtedly will break the hold to some extent that the political establishment have on the Seanad's membership. Also worth noting is a clause that ensures that Seanad elections will occur on the same day as Dáil polling day is. I welcome this. By extension, it will also stop people running for both houses in the Oireachtas. This would lessen the unsavoury and widespread practice by political parties of treating the upper house as either a Montessori or kindergarten for future Dáil candidates, or as a nice retirement home for failed Dáil candidates or party loyalists. The proposal within the bill to extend the electoral franchise to Irish citizens living abroad for Seanad elections is one I strongly support and welcome. Anybody this evening that has a friend, a niece, a child who has had the bad luck to have to emigrate or has had to leave our shores in the last 5 years, and I will remind you, during the height of the recession, 110 people per day were leaving our shores looking for employment abroad. I don't have the exact numbers. We know the 70 million of our diaspora, but just think of the last 7 years and how many people did not want to leave Ireland and had to leave. Surely they, for starters, deserve a vote. And I'd also remind you that it's not easy to vote if you're abroad.